All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's APBP webinar. Today we are featuring the best of ProWalkProBikeProPlace from 2014. My name is Kit Keller, Executive Director of APBP, and I'm delighted to be able to be with you today, and thank you for registering. We are recording this webinar, so you will be able to view it later. If you have any difficulties at all during the webinar, you can certainly post a question and I'll do my best to field the tech issues, but you can also reach out directly to GoToWebinar, and they're really helpful. So do jot that phone number down, and it also appears in your slide handouts. APBP thanks the Project for Public Spaces for helping to produce this webinar, and we're joined today by Mark Plotz. So welcome, Mark. Glad you're here with us. APBP has applied for continuing education credit for the webinar, so if you're looking for that, you'll want to log your attendance on your site host sign-in sheet if you're at a location where many of you are watching together, and we hope that's true. Webinars are always more fun with more people, and then you can share your ideas with one another. We ask that the site hosts return that completed sign-in sheet to us so that we can maintain it for our records, which we're required to do. If you want to simply have a certificate of attendance, you can also download one of those, and we provided you with the link here. And if you have any questions, you can contact APBP directly. We have applied for 1.5 CM credits for today's webinar. We want you to be aware of a few upcoming webinars. APBP members will have access to a free webinar on building equity, race, class, and protected bike lanes on March 4th. And then on March 18th, we're back with our regularly scheduled monthly webinar, and we've been thinking about estimating the numbers of bicycling and walking in communities, and we did that last month, and this year, or this coming March, we're going to be looking at counting programs. So we have a good presentation ready for you, and we hope that you'll be able to join us then. APBP has a biennial conference, much like ProWalkProBike. They have their conference in the even years, and we at APBP are in the odd years. And we have a call for speakers right now. We have set the topic. The theme of the conference is flexibility. We have established the tracks. There are 4 tracks, and the topics within each track. We'll also have a wealth of local mobile sessions that will be hosted by our local host committee, TrailNet, with their colleagues in St. Louis. And we urge you, if you're interested in being a presenter, to take a look at the call for presenters. You'll find that on our website at apbp.org. So without further ado, what I wish to do is introduce you to the 3 topics that we will be looking at, and I'll give that information first, and then we'll start today with a presentation on public space, and then I'll come back and introduce Chris and Jennifer. So we're going to be looking at public space in Seattle and Boston with Chris Carter, Director of Programs, Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston, and I think that has to be my favorite new government agency. Jennifer Wieland is Public Space Program Manager with the Seattle DOT. Then our second presentation will be on Vision Zero for pedestrian safety, new thinking from San Francisco. And here we have 2 presenters, Oliver Gaida and Dana Weissman. Oliver is Senior Transportation Manager with SFMTA, and Dana is Transportation Planner Engineer at Fair and Piers. Our third and final presentation will be at this, coming to you from the site of the next ProWalkProBikeProPlace conference in Vancouver. And we'll be looking at designing intersections for protected bike lanes, the Vancouver, BC Experience. Our presenters will be Ross Kenny, Senior Transportation Engineer, City of Vancouver, and David Roththorn, Senior Transportation Engineer, also with the City of Vancouver. So please allow me to introduce our first two presenters, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And you should be seeing their bios on your screen right now. Chris Carter is Director of Programs, as I mentioned, for the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston. And he has advised on public space initiatives as well as transportation policy, the innovation economy, and he produces short films for the city. Chris has received recognition from the American Planning Association for his work in bringing together storytelling and urban planning. So we're delighted to have Chris with us today. Jennifer leads the Seattle Department of Transportation's Public Space Management Program, and that is a way to enable people to activate the right-of-way by developing new policies and programs and thinking creatively about public space. Seattle has been so good at that for so long. So we're eager to hear what Jennifer is going to present to us today, and I'll just comment that she also holds an MCRP and MPH degrees from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which has produced so many great and stellar people in our field. So with that, I am going to transfer the controls over to Jennifer. So Jennifer, you'll see a message coming to you that you are now the presenter. And I see your screen. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you for the Chapel Hill shout out as well as the Seattle shout out. I'm excited to join Chris today to reprise in very quick fashion our ProWalkProBikeProPlace presentation. So we're going to talk to you about just a few of the things that our cities are doing to use our public spaces differently, and the roles that we as employees of city governments and as designers can play in those initiatives. So first and foremost, why does this work even matter? William H. White once said that it's difficult to design a space that won't attract people, but what's remarkable is how often this has been accomplished. This photo shows you a public space in Seattle that won a concrete award. There's an award from the concrete industry that they apparently give out, and it won an award in 2007. Working for a Department of Transportation, I can tell you that there's nothing wrong with concrete, but a public space that has this happening means that something's not quite right. So over the years, we've gotten really good at designing spaces that don't function for people. But the way that public space really becomes valuable is when we have people using it. This is a photo from an opening of a parklet in Boston, and it really illustrates the value of creating vibrant public spaces and the reasons that we even do this work. It's really about engaging people of all ages and abilities, capitalizing on our assets, and energizing the public realm with positive activities. So what's the role that cities play in all of this? I'm sure that many of you have seen this tactical continuum before, and part of what this conveys is that as the tacticians, as the actors get more bureaucratic, so as people like Chris and I that work for cities get involved, the projects and programs can sometimes get more and more formal and bigger and costlier. But what we found successfully in Seattle and Boston is that as cities, we need to have a role in some of the less permanent projects, some of the tactics that are shown to the left of the screen. And there's a lot that we can learn from the tacticians and the people that typically practice in those ways. We have to be willing to experiment and to test, to succeed and fail, and to move to the right and left on this x-axis while partnering up and down the y-axis. And that's really what we're talking about today, what we've done with which partners and what we've learned along the way. So starting in Seattle, I'm going to touch briefly on our public space management program, what it is, why we built it, and what we've learned so far. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Seattle Department of Transportation, we strive to deliver a first-rate transportation system for the city and to create a vibrant Seattle with connected people, places, and products. The thing that I really like as somebody who is working on creating public spaces about our vision statement is that we're a transportation department that recognizes and calls out the placemaking role that we have. We have to create places for people to be, not just spaces for people to move through. These are the department's 5 core principles, and you'll see those throughout my slides today, especially talking about building healthy communities and supporting a thriving economy. So why a public space management program? Why does that exist in Seattle? Well, for years we've heard from people about all of the things that they want to do, all of the things they want to do in public spaces. That includes the fact that people want places to gather and cheer and to celebrate. These are photos from an alley in our Pioneer Square neighborhood that showed the World Cup out of the back of a U-Haul truck. People also want places to create art, to show character, and to identify their neighborhood or community, really to express themselves. And people want places to play and be active, to gather outside. And the good news in all of that is that we, the city, have space. I'm sure that many of you have similar graphics for the cities that you live and work in. And in Seattle, we've got 27% of our land that is the public right-of-way. So that's more than double the amount of land that is invested in parks. So that's a huge opportunity for us. At the same time, we're also the fastest growing large city in the country. And so we needed an approach to support and manage all of the different uses of our right-of-way. Because the city's geography is fixed, but there's a lot that we're trying to fit in. And so in 2013, we built a public space management program. In true Seattle fashion, for those of you that know how we do things up here, we had a task force of 34 people, both internal and external stakeholders, and we spent about 5 months defining the program's mission and goals, what's included in the program, and then prioritized a 5-year work plan, but tried to ensure that we had enough flexibility to take advantage of opportunities. As part of this program, we now manage about 40 different sub-programs and initiatives. Everything from alley activation to A-frame signs to farmers markets to newspaper boxes to parklets and beyond. The other piece of building the program that I really want to highlight is our goals. So we have 4 goals: to encourage, implement, innovate, and regulate. Part of what is so important about those 4 goals, and that's been really critical to the success of our program, has been changing the mindset within our department and within our division about how we manage public space and how we encourage people to use that space. Public space management lives within our street use division, and that's the place where SDOT issues permits. For as long as most people can remember, street use was the place that you went to be told, no. Sorry, we don't understand what you're trying to do, no. No, that's not about transportation, we can't help you. So part of what we've done through public space management is really focus on our role as promoters and as supporters of innovation as much as we focused on our role for regulation. So we're now a one-stop shop team. We develop programs, we implement them, we review permits, and we regulate. We enforce when necessary. But our goal is to work with people and not shut people down or stop people from doing what they want to do unless we really have to. And so where are we today? We are the program of rainbows and unicorns. So this very beautiful graphic was something that we adopted after reading comments. One of our team members found a comment on a local blog that talked about our parklet program and how the people that came up with this idea must see nothing but rainbows and unicorns, and wouldn't it be wonderful to live in their heads? So while maybe it wasn't a compliment, we have absolutely embraced this and are really working to incorporate the fun and incorporate tactical approaches in the work that we do. And we've got work underway on most of our 40 different initiatives, but I'm going to quickly just highlight a few for you today. So our first lesson learned, the first lesson that I want to share with you through this example is to make entry easy for people. I'm sure that many of you have participated in some way, shape, or form in Parking Day. And in my mind, Parking Day is really the single easiest entry point to helping people understand that they can do something different in the street, that the right-of-way can be used differently. The City of Seattle didn't initially have a role in Parking Day, but we've changed that over the last couple of years and have really grown participation. We don't charge people permit fees. We have a really easy process for getting your Parking Day installation approved, and we even host our own Parking Day installation. Sometimes people say that Parking Day has lost its soul now that governments are participating, but I still believe that it's a great way to get people engaged. And for us, it led to a parklet program. We launched our pilot parklet program in 2013, and we now have 6 parklets in the city with another 9 on the way. And as of this past weekend, we transitioned our pilot program into a permanent program and launched a pilot straighterings program, which brings together the best of parklets and sidewalk cafes. So piloting something, using that testing approach, gave us the cover that we needed to be able to try out something different that people weren't quite sure whether it was going to work or not. It also enabled us to evaluate, to see whether parklets were going to have a negative impact on parking, whether they were going to have a negative impact on small businesses. We found that none of that was true. They've been a huge success, and so we moved forward to make the program permanent. My second lesson learned is that we needed to think of creative ways to overcome some hurdles. And I use the word hurdles both seriously but also a little bit loosely. So this image that you're seeing is of a family that built a sandbox in their planting strip. We don't allow play equipment in the right-of-way, primarily because of concerns about how we manage risk. So because we couldn't permit this, the city told this family that they had to take the sandbox out. And that started a huge media campaign, as you might imagine. We also warned them that we were going to fine them $500 a day if they didn't take the sandbox out, and you can imagine what that generated. So even though we haven't quite been able to figure out how to get around the risk elements and how to actually let people install play equipment in the right-of-way, we took an incremental step to overcoming this hurdle. We went with a Play Streets program. It's a simple, easy program. It allows people to close a residential street as frequently as they would like and play in it. So this is another of our pilot programs that will soon transition into a permanent program, but it's really been about showing our folks that worry about risk that there is a way to manage it and that it's totally safe to allow people to play in the streets. And the last example and lesson I want to mention is the value of testing and iterating and jumping on opportunities when they present themselves. And this is a project that a colleague of mine led, and what it does is illustrate a new program that we're about to launch into, which is a Pavement to Parks program. So we took this intersection, which is in our First Hill neighborhood, and even though we were still in the early stages of design and community outreach, we took advantage of an opportunity to reprogram it and to really use an activity in that intersection as a proof of concept, as a way to engage the people, and a way to build support. So we took a one-night Scrabble tournament, which was hugely popular with these gigantic Scrabble tiles. And this summer, it is going to become the interim design that you see here. And we'll build a Pavement to Park program around it. What's next for Seattle is that we're about to release Move Seattle, which is a new strategic plan for the department. It talks specifically about the importance of a vibrant city and calls out much of the work that we do in public space management, as well as new programs that we're going to be building. So a lot more to come from Seattle in the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
All right. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was fascinating. We already have some questions coming in. And if you do have a question for our presenters, we're going to break tradition a bit and take questions after each topic, given that these topics are so different. So great. Chris, I can see your slides. Good. Great.
Jennifer, thanks for that wonderful intro. I think if we were doing a Super Bowl of public space, Seattle might win this one. That Scrabble board's pretty awesome. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Newer Mechanics does here in Boston, and specifically some of the projects in our Streetscape Lab, and then a little bit of a deeper dive into a project called Public Space Invitational. So Newer Mechanics works as the R&D lab for the city, and that kind of works in two ways. We help departments sort of achieve their innovation goals, and then we also act as a front door for civic entrepreneurs in the city. A lot of the recognition that we get is around app development, whether it's a 311 system on your phone or an app that detects potholes automatically. But we do a lot of work outside of that on everything from the economy to education to the streetscape, which is great because my coding skills are very poor. The model that we use is very similar to what Jennifer was talking about in Seattle, this idea of sourcing ideas and solutions, piloting things on a sort of a small playing field, and then scaling the things that work and learning from the things that fail. So a couple quick examples on the breadth of the type of projects we do. This is an architectural lighting project on a pedestrian bridge that we did a couple years ago, to smaller scale things like heart rate monitors that play music to the sound of your heartbeat. And we've installed 4 of these around the city, to solar-powered benches that charge your phones, to things that are in the streetscape but actually move around. This is a mobile city hall that looks very similar to what a food truck would look like, except instead of getting tacos, you can get a dog license. And truck side guards as well. This is a project we piloted to prevent rollover incidents that were happening with cyclists and pedestrians. We had a few fatalities in Boston. We installed these on public works vehicles, and that actually led to a citywide ordinance to install these on all trucks with city contracts. As Jennifer sort of talked about, I'm sure a lot of people have done this analysis. As we were starting to think about what is the next thing in public space that we're going to do, what kind of next projects can we take on, we wanted to look at what kind of public space we had accessible to people. And most of, we have a third of the property in Boston that's actually owned by the city. But when people actually sort of look at what they think is public space, they think of this. They think of the Common, they think of an Olmsted Park network, but they don't think about where the majority of that space is, right? So it's in the streetscape. It's plazas, it's sidewalks, it's streets. It's over half of what we have that we could offer. So after we did this analysis, which I'm sure many of you have done, we started to think how we could get the public a little bit more engaged in that process. We wanted to really start thinking about a paradigm shift. So how do we go from people thinking about public space as a bench with a tree to thinking about playing in our streets? And we came up with this sort of central question. How can we have the public help us make public space intuitive and delightful? I think it was probably the first time anyone heard a mayor use the word delightful in a press conference when we started talking about this. But it was really, that was a sense of joy and wonderment in using the streetscape that we were going for. So as we were sort of coming up with ideas, the one that we sort of landed on as a team was, what if we could run a contest of some sort, a public design contest, and we give away money? So we took that idea to the law department, and they didn't think that giving away money in a contest was a very good idea. So they steered us towards an RFP. So any of you that work for government, this is pretty common. They're cumbersome, they're hard to answer. If you haven't done them before, it's a lot of work with very little payoff. We kind of thought that it was going to stop people in their tracks. It was the person that was the individual artist or designer or engineer wasn't really going to know what to do with an RFP. So the law department came back and said, well, what if we did an RFI? We put out a request for information, we asked for interesting ideas, there's no commitment from the city, and we felt like that was sort of copping out on our end of the bargain of actually doing some of the work that they were suggesting. And they came back with another solution. They said, well, what if we did a request for qualifications? And people submitted their qualifications as an artist or designer, you pre-selected them, and then you let them work on whatever they wanted to. And we just didn't feel like that was quite the right fit either. And at the same time, my colleague Michael Evans had been working on this celebrating people getting married in City Hall project. And we were doing a lot of stuff around weddings, and we set up a photo booth and all this stuff. And we started thinking about, well, what's the joyous part of the wedding, and how can we fold that into the public space? And we figured people RSVP for weddings. People want to go, they get invited. So what if we ran a public space invitational? And the idea was really simple. We were just going to have a public design competition, and we were going to guarantee that we actually implemented some of the projects that were submitted. The guidelines were very straightforward. We sized them in a very small dollar amount, which fit neatly under the procurement cap in the state of Massachusetts, so we could do it legally without having to go out through an RFP. We wanted designs to be functional and inviting. We wanted them to be durable. We said they had needed to last a number of years, even though we weren't sure we would keep them out there a number of years. And we needed them to be implementable very quickly. So keeping with the idea of sort of tactical urbanism, making sure that things could get out in the street relatively soon. Lastly, we wanted them to be scaled. We wanted ideas that you could replicate, or you could replicate the process. And then we put this all into essentially a 6-question application that was a Google form, as well as a poster submission. So the bar to entry was very low. There was some vetting that we did, of applications, but very simple for people to get involved with. And we carved these into 3 categories. The first was the streetscape. We kept it very broad: sidewalks, streets, curbs, plazas, whatever it might be. The second was City Hall. We had a new mayor that had just come in, Mayor Walsh at the time, and he entered into the 3rd floor on the first day of taking office and was a little bit appalled by what the public space actually looked like in this building. He had come from the State House. There was more reverence there, and he decided that he really wanted to tackle this building and sort of embrace the opportunity here. And the last one we just called Random Awesome Designs. This could be anything. Really, we just wanted the mayor to have to say the word rad at a press conference. We did an extensive outreach campaign. We held public meetings. We did some social media work. We went to design schools and talked to students. We were trying to sort of cast the net as broad as possible to get engineers and architects and designers and anybody who might have a good idea involved. And this brings me to the first lesson. We underestimated the amount of creativity that was out there. We got ideas from physicists, from design students, from high school students, all across the board. People had ways that they wanted to improve bits of public space all across the city. We ended up with 72 entries, and that was in sort of the categories that you see on the screen here. This was way more than we thought we would get. There was a similar project in Philadelphia, and they got a little over 20 entries. We were just sort of blown away by the response that people had for this. So I'm going to go through just a couple of the ones that we didn't fund and then a few of the ones that we did. The first project that I'm showing you here is Islands in the Charles River. We thought this was really creative. Unfortunately, the EPA did not think that people should be swimming in the Charles River on a regular basis just yet. And this was a balloon that you could float over the city and tweet to, and it would tweet back to you. We had some initial vetting on this, and the FAA also decided that this probably wouldn't be a good idea for us. And here's one that we did actually implement within the first month of the program. You can see the mayor sort of dedicating his book of choice there on the right-hand side. But this is a portable reading room that moves up and down the Greenway in downtown Boston when there's not 7 feet of snow on it. Hydrophone is a tidal vibraphone. It sort of changes in pitch as the tide moves in and out, and people can play it. That'll be showing up this spring. And this is my favorite project called Seatlight Control. It takes those utility boxes that you see all around every city, turns them into a functional bench. And lastly, we were looking sort of inside City Hall with projects. So this is what the 3rd floor mezzanine kind of looks like when you walk into Boston City Hall. There were a couple chairs scattered up there, a piano that worked half the time. Not much going on in terms of activating the space. This is what it looks like as of a couple months ago. We had the Stairs of Fabulousness project, which is skateboard tape. It was guaranteed to make City Hall 400% more fabulous by the designer, and the public certainly agreed with that. Which is sort of lesson 2 we learned in that project. Something as simple as putting down tape on stairs required a lot of legal counsel. Since then, when we've been thinking about how we would do this again, there's insurance sort of questions that we've tried to answer. We're setting up sort of professional consultants for these designers and architects and artists who maybe have not done this type of work before, sort of built into that award package. The last part that we did around this project was we threw a party. We invited all the designers to come. We hung up all their ideas. We invited the public. We gave anybody who had submitted an idea sort of this official button so they could go around and sort of tout that. And we gave everybody else free donuts and beer, which was an awkward combination, but people seemed to enjoy it. And lastly, we gave the winners a green hoodie award. So we were trying to mimic a little bit of the PGA Masters Tour. We wanted it to feel sort of like an invitational. So we gave out these green hoodies to the 8 winners that we selected. And this is kind of where we arrived, as we were sort of reflecting on this project. This is the last lesson I'll share, is that it really wasn't about the project. This ended up being a trust exercise with the public and with the design and artist community. So they saw that the city was really committed to actually improving public space with a small amount of money, but really trying to take their ideas and make them happen. And we saw that reflected in the press that we received afterwards, but more importantly, we saw it in this quote, which is sort of my favorite. It ended up in a Globe article this past December after we added a small coffee shop into that stairs of fabulousness area. And I think we aspire to, in the work that we do, sort of in newer mechanics, is to make things feel more human. And I think everybody who's a government official aspires to make things suck a little bit less. So with that, I will pass it back over to Deb.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really fascinating. And what I'm going to do now is show your beautiful pictures here so that we can take a few questions from the audience before we move to the next presentation. So give me a second to cue that up. And we can go ahead and do this. Yes, here we go. All right, so a question for Jennifer. Did you have pushback on lost parking revenue with parklets? And was it easy to change people's minds on the need to try these? That question is from Paul.
We've had a little bit of pushback on lost parking revenue, but the mayor, at the time we launched the parklet program, our previous mayor, Mayor McGinn, was really clear about the fact that we were not going to try and collect revenue from folks that were hosting a parklet because of the fact that they were providing a public good. They were creating a new public space. Now, as part of the Streeteries program that we've just launched as a pilot that includes a sidewalk cafe component in a parklet, we will charge a fee for lost parking revenue because it then is a situation where a business is able to make money. So for parklets, no, and I think it's been relatively well received. For Streeteries, yes, we will charge for lost revenue. Changing people's minds about how they think about an on-street parking space, I think, is difficult in any city. We've had a lot of publicity in Seattle lately about changes to on-street parking availability because of protected bike lane projects, parklets, bus lanes, all sorts of different things. And so it's always a difficult conversation, but I think what makes it palatable for people and what makes it easy for us to explain is the fact that we're trading car storage for something that works for everybody. And when we talk about the numbers and the evaluation that we've done, we talk about the percentage of parking that's lost, you end up talking about something along the lines of 0.06% of the on-street parking in a quarter mile of a parklet. And so then people start to really understand that, it's not a big deal. I am getting something good by giving up what I perceive to be the space that's really important.
Well, thank you for that. And I have to say parklets are one of my favorite new urban inventions. So thanks for being a leader in that. This is a question which I think is perhaps for Chris. I'm not sure. This is from John. How is the budgeting for these initiatives handled? Does it come from strategic reserve or specific program funding? So Chris, why don't you start?
Yeah, I can answer that. For the Public Space Invitational, it was a couple different places. We went out and sought corporate sponsors for both the event and for some individual projects. So about half the money came through that form of sort of a public-private partnership. The other portion came through capital dollars that we have access to. The mayor had carved out $1 million in something called the Streetscape Innovation Fund. So we have access to capital dollars for projects that sort of fit those needs. I would say we struggle with finding operating dollars, which is usually what cities need for some of the more tactical urbanism projects that aren't going to last as long. And that comes from a variety of sort of grant locations that we sort of scrape together and do that type of work with. But things that are going to be out on the street, we use capital dollars from the city.
Okay, thank you. Would you care to comment on that, Jennifer?
Well, the beauty of public space management, at least as it exists right now, is that we are really looking to the private sector and to our private partners to come in with the funding for implementation. So, for example, with something like parklets, it's privately funded and privately maintained. Where the city's contribution comes from is really in the staff time to make these types of projects happen. We haven't been in the situation that Chris is in and that Boston is in terms of being able to actually give out awards yet. That's something we'd like to do in the future. But we cover our program costs and our staff time through permit review fees that go directly into our street use fund. And so we're able to use some of that money back for public benefit.
Great, thank you. And then I'll ask one last question, and then we'll go to the next presentation. Chris, for you, what were the challenges or obstacles with utilities when implementing the seat light project?
Yeah, that's still ongoing. So the seat light project, we've gone through a couple different prototype phases on. We're hoping to deploy sort of the final version this summer. The biggest challenge has actually been getting the bench UL certified. And we're now working with sort of an outside lab to do that piece of it. But it ends up driving the cost up when you want to make sure that you're putting it out there in the safest way possible. So that has been a little bit of a hurdle. But the way we got around most of that was using parts that are already native to those boxes. So if you peeked inside one of those boxes, there's a lot of space in there already. We just sort of reconfigured the order in which things are, but it has not been easy.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Jennifer and to Chris. And we're going to move on to our second topic now. And if you do have more questions for Jennifer or for Chris, you can certainly continue to post them and I will forward them to them. And as they're able, they can comment in writing to you. So thank you so much. And now we're going to welcome our presentation on Vision Zero. And I'd like to introduce to you Oliver Gaida and Dana Weissman. And their bios will be up on the screen in just a moment. So Oliver, as I mentioned, is with SFMTA, and he has been there for 13 years. Before that, he was the pedestrian and bicycle coordinator for the city of Asheville, North Carolina. And within San Francisco, all on-street bicycle and pedestrian improvements are within SFMTA's implementation purview, which is very interesting, and they're doing such good work. So next, I'd like to introduce Dana Weissman, and Dana is with Fair and Peers, and we're so proud of Dana. She co-authored a paper on the Walk First approach to prioritizing and defining pedestrian safety capital improvement projects, and that won the 2015 TRB Pedestrian Committee Best Paper Award. So we're delighted with her accomplishments, and she'll be telling us all about how she came to understand and promote that concept. Now I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Hopefully I'm only hearing it. But next what we'll do is go first. I think Oliver and Dana are presenting in the same space, so I'm going to transfer the slides to Dana, and just be aware that you may actually have a different name coming up compared to who is actually speaking. So let me send the screen controls to you. Just a moment. Okay, you should see them coming to you now, Dana. And I see your screen. Great.
So great. I will start to Oliver Gaida, and to start off with what is Vision Zero? And Vision Zero in San Francisco is a policy which aspires to eliminate all traffic fatalities by 2024. And Vision Zero addresses all transportation modes and grew out of the work that was occurring that we were doing for pedestrians. So the outline is I will first cover the presentation with San Francisco Vision Zero, the context and the history, and then Dana will cover the Walk First process, which created the body of pedestrian work within Vision Zero and provides its backbone of projects. So in 2009 and 2010 is where I'll pick up the Vision Zero story. San Francisco had several high-profile incidents, and it really highlighted the public health crisis. Additionally, in San Francisco, there was a continued fact that we have a fairly high pedestrian collision volumes and fatality rate. And this slide right here has San Francisco comparing it to other cities, and there's a little asterisk under several of the cities that at the time that we created this slide that had either a Vision Zero policy or a towards zero deaths policy. And for a lot of folks out there, these things don't happen overnight. So I want to cover a little bit of kind of the timeline of Vision Zero in San Francisco. So when we look back to 2010, the then Mayor Newsom, who now is our Lieutenant Governor, issued an executive directive regarding pedestrian safety. And that helped create a target. It created a multi-agency task force that really brought the Department of Public Works into the conversation with us at MTA. And it really created a greater sense of urgency and collaboration that we really needed within the city. It had a goal at 50% reduction of severe and fatal pedestrian collisions by 2021. So going into 2011, San Francisco received a grant from the California Office of Traffic Safety to do the first phase of Walk First, and it developed a framework of how the city was going to prioritize pedestrian improvements and kind of created the first map of a high-injury corridor network within the city that concentrated, that showed the streets with the highest concentration of severe and fatal injuries, and also developed some draft policies. And then in 2013, we had a new mayor, which is our current mayor, Mayor Lee, and as part of the nation's first Walk to School Day, launched the San Francisco Pedestrian Strategy. And so that essentially reaffirmed the previous mayor's directive and added the targeted goals and the framework that came out of Walk First. And then in 2014 was really kind of the key year where Dana joined us on this project. Walk First Phase 2 had an end goal of developing a capital list of projects targeting key intersections and corridors with proposed engineering countermeasures. It was really looking at how should we prioritize our funding. It was kind of setting the background stage for a potential bond measure that we were contemplating here in San Francisco. At that time, San Francisco only had about $17 million for the 5 years of the life of the CIP for all pedestrian improvements. What the body of work of Walk First did is it helped really kind of frame that conversation and kind of set a target of what we should be looking at is $50 million over 5 years. And with a lot of the information that came out of that process, the bond measure did pass, and that's what we're working with right now. And also in 2014, as we kind of were winding up the Walk First process, the dialogue, the national dialogue about Vision Zero was really gaining steam, and San Francisco passed the Vision Zero resolution to have 0 traffic fatalities for all modes, not just pedestrians, so 0 traffic fatalities for all modes by 2024. And now in 2015, we've begun to implement, and we've also issued a 2-year strategy and looking forward on the other areas besides the engineering, the education, the enforcement, and outreach, and how we're going to address those in the next 2 years. So what we learned from the Walk First process, well, we were able to summarize a lot of the data regarding pedestrians, and what we kind of were able to see is that, you know, obviously a lot of people were walking, a lot of people were being injured. There was a disproportionate number of those being injured were seniors. The severe and fatal collisions were happening on a small subset of streets. Motorists were primarily at fault, and there was a pattern to our collisions that left turns and speeds were disproportionately showing up in our collision patterns, and also that all these injuries were very expensive. So taking that effort and folding it into the larger Vision Zero work, we continue to see that the pedestrians are the backbone of all of the injuries within San Francisco, with 60% being pedestrians for traffic fatalities. So when you include all the modes within Vision Zero, we still see a distinct set of streets. We have now a focus of 12% of the streets within San Francisco where the majority of collisions are occurring. And that's our focus right now of Vision Zero, is identifying our capital improvements on these streets. And so I'll end my point of the presentation with this slide that has our Vision Zero website at the top, visionzerosf.org, and a screenshot of our 2-year action strategy.
Great, thanks Oliver. This is Dana Weissman now, and as Oliver mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, one of the most crucial building blocks of Vision Zero was the Walk First Pedestrian Safety project. And Vision Zero in San Francisco really started with pedestrian safety and Walk First was the city's first effort to define and prioritize its pedestrian safety capital projects. And the goal was to develop a comprehensive and data-driven approach to replace the typical strategy of selecting projects ad hoc as they arose. And there were really two main questions that drove the Walk First effort. The first addressed the challenges of identifying site-specific capital projects on such a large city scale. And the second question addressed the funding challenge, how to make the most out of limited monetary resources. And Fair & Peers joined the effort in 2013, and we worked closely with the city team to develop a methodology that could help address these challenges. The Walk First approach involved three basic steps. The first is to define the problem, where we generated collision profiles to describe the types of collisions that are most frequent and lead to the most severe injuries across the city, and also to identify where those profiles are most relevant. The second step is defining the solution. And here, through a comprehensive literature review, we identified the countermeasures that would be most effective at addressing the collision profiles defined in step one. And finally, we prioritized the projects. And here we identified the metrics that the city would want to use to prioritize pedestrian safety projects and applied those metrics to the full set of potential projects to generate a recommended investment strategy. Walk First was entirely data-driven, and the project relied heavily on a comprehensive database created by the San Francisco Department of Public Health. And this database included not only pedestrian collision data recorded and maintained by the California Highway Patrol, but also census demographic data about the areas immediately surrounding the collision sites, information on proximate land uses, information on roadway configurations and signalization at the crash sites, data on transit, etc. And all of these data were geographically tied to the pedestrian high injury network. And this map shown here was a starting point for the more complicated multimodal Vision Zero high injury network map that Oliver showed earlier in the presentation. This map represents the corridors and intersections with the highest prevalence of pedestrian fatalities and severe injuries across San Francisco. Now, the first major step of the Walk First process was to define the problem, which required us to understand what types of pedestrian collisions were occurring across the network. And to do this, we identified a set of what we refer to as collision profiles, which are shown in the leftmost column. The collision profiles describe the conditions surrounding the crashes, accounting for elements like crash location or driver or pedestrian behavior or victim attributes. And we look to the data to determine whether the defining factors of a collision profile are present for a given crash. And if so, that crash fits the bill for a given collision profile. So for example, if a collision occurred at a signalized intersection when a driver made a left turn, the collision would be categorized under collision profile 4A, left turns at signalized intersections. And we could map where across the pedestrian high injury network a collision profile was most relevant. So for this collision profile, left turns at signalized intersections, it described as much as 25% of all pedestrian injuries on the high injury network. It was the most common of the identified collision profiles. And the set of collision profiles was developed based on research of common causes of pedestrian collisions, local knowledge of the San Francisco street network, and an analysis of the frequency with which different collision factors appeared in the data. It was an iterative process. We used trial and error to identify a set of collision profiles that would be comprehensive yet focused enough to be meaningful. And all of this information allowed us to categorize the different types of crashes that were occurring across the network. And it helped us tell a story of what was going on when people were getting hit. It also helped us define the solutions. There are a number of possible treatments that could be applied at a given location, but some are more effective than others and work best when applied under certain conditions. Some are also significantly more expensive to implement than others. And our challenge was to determine which countermeasures could best address the collision types that we identified under the first step of the process. We then needed to assign those countermeasures to the locations where they would be most beneficial, given the types of collisions that occurred there. And finally, our goal was to prioritize improvements that could be implemented at a relatively low cost in a relatively short time frame. We conducted a fairly extensive literature review to help us quantify the effectiveness of every countermeasure, as well as identify under what conditions the countermeasures would be most relevant. We compiled cost data to determine how much money would be needed to implement each treatment, and we looked to example projects to estimate a time frame from planning to construction. And so armed with all of this information about the countermeasures, we were able to apply the most effective treatments where they were most needed and use them to address site-specific issues. So what we ended up with was a very long list of capital improvements to implement across the high injury network. But what we still needed was a way to prioritize these projects. So we hosted a number of charrettes with city decision makers to identify the metrics that the city wanted to use to prioritize pedestrian safety projects. And what came out of those discussions was a preference to first tackle projects that could be implemented relatively cheaply and with high effectiveness, often with temporary measures, followed by a long-term rollout of more permanent projects that would address the most severe crashes. And this process generated a recommended investment strategy for the city to prioritize implementation of its pedestrian safety projects. And finally, I want to bring this back to Oliver's portion of the presentation and show a recent example of a priority pedestrian safety project that was identified through Walk First and that has now been implemented through Vision Zero. And in addition to painted safety zones, the city has also begun to implement corner daylighting in the Tenderloin neighborhood, continental crosswalks across the city, and no right turn on red policies at selected intersections. And these are just a few examples of Vision Zero in action. And so that's it for our presentation. We're happy to field questions that people have now, and definitely please feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about Vision Zero or Walk First.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Dana and Oliver, you'll see that I'm forwarding a few questions to you, and I'll go ahead and take the controls back, and we will show your, we'll go ahead and show your faces so that people can see you, which is always great. So let's start with a question that I haven't forwarded to you yet, and that is, could you please explain what you mean by corner daylighting?
So this is Oliver Gaida, and so corner daylighting is a term you'll find on street films, online, streets blog. But essentially, it is removing the parking and in advance of a crosswalk so that the cone of vision of a driver can see the pedestrians more easily on the sidewalk as they're approaching the crosswalk. And so so you can also refer to that as red zones, or it's really not. We try to refrain from referring to it as removing parking at intersections for obvious reasons.
All right, thank you. That is a real interesting term and something that does resonate with people once you explain it, so thank you for that. And thanks to Wendelin for that question. The next question is from Axel, who wants to know, Dana, what about area-wide low speed limits? This could reduce crashes by 30%.
Yeah, we know that speed is actually the #1 factor in causing higher severity and fatalities with collisions, and that's something that would definitely be a beneficial policy in terms of reducing those severe injuries and fatalities. I know that in New York they underwent that process and were successful in reducing speed citywide. I'm going to ask Oliver, though, to talk to the process in San Francisco.
Yeah, so that process, we are exploring rolling that out as far as a speed reduction at a citywide basis. We're also exploring another measure that will need state approval, is automated speed enforcement, which is similar to the red light cameras. So those are general policies that we're looking at in concert with the engineering measures that we're rolling out.
Great, thank you. A question from Paul. Do you currently have any jaywalking enforcement, or considered it as an interim measure?
Let's see, that's a good question. As far as the education and outreach, we try not to get into the pedestrian shaming. We see that most of the injuries are caused by the motorists, and so we're trying to focus the efforts on that. But there is education also targeting at safer pedestrian behavior. But I wouldn't say that we don't have a targeted campaign on jaywalking per se.
I loved your response. More than 20 years ago, the captain of the Seattle Police Department made it very clear that jaywalking enforcement was not the solution, and that remains true today, so thank you. This question is from John. Pedestrian habits change as infrastructure changes, so have you taken that into account, or how has that been taken into account?
So that's an excellent point. And one of the challenges, I think, with this whole process is that when we look at collisions, we look at trends, and you need several years of collisions. So we're looking at a snapshot of time of information. So 2011 to 2011 was the snapshot of time that we were looking at for our collisions. So obviously that as we go forward, we're changing the infrastructure, and our plan is to repeat the process and see what change our infrastructure, what we put in, as it changed the behavior, as it changed the environment. But we're always going to be in this kind of interesting place where we're going to be looking at data that's a little older than what's actually out there on the street.
Okay, thank you. And this question from Nora is a really nice follow-up from the earlier one. Was there an enforcement component for motorists that was part of the Vision Zero program?
So there is an enforcement part of the larger Vision Zero program. There's and so that's being addressed in the 2-year strategy. Dana's presentation was mostly focused on the engineering aspects, but there are some broader policies that were also recommended to be looked at.
Thank you. And then the last question that we have about your presentation is from Tim. Has there been any talk with your city police department and prosecutors of changes to the ways that they investigate and handle the parties involved in fatal crashes in the city? Any new enforcement activities planned, such as visibility awareness campaigns, bike light giveaways, anti-texting campaigns?
Yes, we do have those campaigns. We do have bike light giveaways, and police are part of the larger Vision Zero committee, so it is a citywide committee. So those are all part of the 2-year strategy, and we're looking at ways that we can get our collision data and better, faster, and have a better interface with our police department. So one of the offshoots was actually trying to automate the collision records, so there'd be more of a standard way that the officers are entering the data, because right now everything's done on paper, and it takes quite a long time for us to get the information back in the office.
Yeah, and these are great questions about enforcement, because that's such an important leg of this process. And the conversations have been initiated with the police department, and they're part of the team. And I think one of the most interesting programs that's been implemented in San Francisco and is being rolled out through the police department is Focus on the 5. And that means that police are being encouraged to look for and enforce 5 very specific traffic violations that the data have shown are the most frequent causes of severe injury and fatality for pedestrians. So they're trying to encourage enforcement to be targeted towards the worst violations.
Great, thank you. Well, those are the only questions that we have. If you do have additional questions for Oliver or for Dana, you can continue to post them, and I'll forward them to our presenters. If they're able to respond, they will. Otherwise, we'll certainly forward the questions to them later as well. Thank you, Oliver and Dana, for your presentation, and we will now go to the next presentation, which is really a bit of a recap of 2014 ProWalk ProBike, and also a glimpse of what you may see in Vancouver, British Columbia, in September 2016 at the 2016 ProWalk ProBikeProPlace conference. And our final topic then is on designing intersections for protected bike lanes, the Vancouver Experience. And we're going to hear from Ross Kenny and from David Roththorn. And I am going to share with you their bios so that you can take a look at them as I highlight a few points. Ross is responsible for planning and implementing projects to improve and extend the city's pedestrian, bicycle, and greenways networks. And they have quite an ambitious goal to reach a sustainable mode share by 2040. He's also managed the design and community consultation on the Union Street upgrade project, and so we're eager to hear more from Ross. And David has been with the department for since 2001, where his work has included freeway interchanges and local street calming. So he's really done quite a bit of everything. And in recent years, he's been working on planning and designing various parts of Vancouver's growing networks of protected bike lanes. So it's pretty exciting to hear from them now. And I will transfer the slides to David. And David and Ross are both presenting from the same location. So once again, the person whose name comes up on the screen may not be the person who is actually speaking.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is David. I'm going to do most of the talking through the presentation, and when we get to questions, Ross and I are both available to answer those. So we're here to talk to you today about our experience in the last several years about designing intersections for protected bike lanes in Vancouver. And the reason we think this is an interesting topic is that over the last several years there's been materials that have been published that have given those of us who design these kind of facilities better guidance about how to design protected bike lanes. Documentation from Denmark, from the Netherlands, from Velo Quebec in Canada, and NACDO's Urban Bikeway Design Guide. And they're all huge steps forward to help us do our work. But one of the things that most of these design guides do is they talk about the protected bike lanes on the block, or get between the intersections and approaching the intersections, but there's limited guidance as to how to deal with getting bikes safely through intersections, particularly intersections that connect to protected bike lanes. These two photos are from NACDO's guide, and you can see that the one on the bottom right is approaching an intersection. The one on the top left shows a single protected bike lane and how that cyclists could transition through an intersection to make a left turn, but not all the movements that a typical intersection for cars would provide for through left and right movements from all four directions. Now, many of you may be familiar with an excellent video that was put together by a fellow named Nick Falbo. It's available online at protectedintersection.com. And unfortunately, the technology doesn't allow us to show videos as part of these webinars. Otherwise, I would have showed at least a clip of it, because I think it's really important, and I encourage all of you to take a look at it. So if you've got a paper and pen in front of you, write that down, protectedintersection.com, and take a little time to look at that if you haven't already seen that video. But this capture from that video shows what our intersections could look like, with protected intersections approaching them from all directions, and full protection of people moving through the intersection. And we're going to talk a little bit about how some of the work we've done in Vancouver has tried to incorporate those elements. Quick little pause to make sure you know where we are. We're in the southwest corner of Canada. We're a couple hundred kilometers north of Seattle. We have a very similar climate, mild, wet winters. Sorry, Boston, and modest, temperate summers. Doesn't get too hot here. We're a city of 600,000 in an urban region of about 2 million. We're right by the U.S.-Canadian border, and the conurbation really extends down to Portland, where there's several million more people in Seattle, Portland area. We have some policy that's been adopted recently that builds on older transportation policy for the city of Vancouver. we've set ourselves some transportation mode targets for the year 2040, when we have said that we want to have 2/3 of all trips being done by sustainable modes. That's walking, cycling, and transit. And within that 2/3, 67%, that's about 12% bicycle mode share. We're at about 4% right now. Pretty good by North American standards, but we still have some work to do. And we've been building bike facilities in Vancouver maybe for about 25 years now. But most of the first couple of decades, through the 90s and the first decade of this century, we were mostly building bike boulevards. The canvas that we're working on, if you will, in Vancouver is a rectangular grid network, fairly consistent, that was laid out about 100 years ago. We're bounded on the north and all around on 3 of 4 sides by the water, by the ocean, and we have a border with an adjacent municipality, and we have a fairly complete network of bicycle boulevards. But what we didn't have is we didn't have much built bicycle infrastructure in our urban core, in our downtown, which is on a peninsula, and some of the adjacent more commercial areas. Just giving you another perspective on that area. So what we had in 2008, before we really gotten serious about building protected bike lanes, is we had our downtown peninsula, which was ringed, and still is, by a recreational, what we call the seawall. It's a mix. Some parts of it's mixed walking and cycling. Some of it has separate cycling and walking paths. But it's a lovely waterfront promenade, if you will, and it gets used by a lot of cyclists. We had bicycle boulevards. Those are the yellow lines that connected into parts of the seawall and allowed cyclists to get close to the downtown core, but didn't get into the core. In the early 2000s, we built a network of conventional painted bike lanes on some downtown arterial streets. Those are the narrow red lines that you see in this slide. But those facilities, those downtown facilities, they certainly weren't built for Isabella. If you had the chance to go to ProWalkProBike in Pittsburgh, you were introduced to the idea of Isabella, a young girl who wants to get to school, get around her neighborhood by bike. The catchphrase that we use in Vancouver is all ages and abilities. That's the same idea. Build for 8-year-old kids, build for seniors, build for new cyclists, and you're building for everybody. And so we've taken that to heart. We had a watershed event happen in our little world of bicycle infrastructure in 2009. Following a civic election in 2008 where we got a new mayor and mostly a new council who had campaigned, many of them, on a platform of converting a lane of traffic on a bridge called the Burrard Bridge. They campaigned to convert one lane to a bike lane. So that election happened in fall of 2008. In July 2009, we did just that. We took a 6-vehicle lane bridge and converted it to a 5-vehicle lane bridge and created a protected bike lane. And the world didn't end. The helicopters that were hovering above, taking photographs, or looking for photographs of traffic chaos that didn't exist. They didn't hang around for too long. And emboldened by that, our council asked us to look at building more protected bike lanes, particularly to get into and through downtown. So within the next year, we built 2 projects on Hornby Street and Dunsmuir Street and created what's not quite a network, but sort of a T of protected bike lanes in our downtown core that allowed cyclists to get from the east and from the west and get across downtown. And we did that largely by converting some existing parking space and a little bit of moving vehicle space to carve out some space for 2-way separated bike lanes on at the side of 1-way vehicle streets. We created dedicated right turn lanes. We managed the vehicle turns across the bike lanes using signage, in some cases requiring by signage drivers to yield to the bicycle traffic. In some places we banned the right turn where we felt that the volumes were too high or there were other considerations why simply allowing drivers to yield to cycle traffic wasn't going to be enough. In addition to managing the vehicle traffic across the bike route, we also manage the pedestrian traffic, both at intersections, but also at places like this bus stop by creating a new bus landing pad and marking the pedestrian crossings of the bike route, of the bike paths. And in a few places, we introduced something that was new to Vancouver at the time, which is bicycle signals, separating the vehicle turn movements from the bicycle through movements. But largely what we were doing in all those cases was managing the conflicts between bicycles that were traveling along a route with the vehicles that were turning across the route. And we didn't do a lot of work trying to figure out how the cyclists who get to the intersection of two of these protected bike lanes, how they make their way through the intersection. We had one significant case of this on those two projects that were built in 2010 at the intersection of Hornby Street and Dunsmuir Street, where the two routes, the protected bike lanes create a T intersection. The intersection for vehicles is a full intersection. They're both one-way vehicle streets, so we don't have a full complement of movements, but the bikes are really operating within a T intersection, and we really didn't provide a lot of very specific guidance to cyclists about how they would use the intersection. I'll try to explain a little bit what does happen. So for example, if you're a cyclist that's coming on Dunsmuir Street and you're approaching Hornby Street where you're reaching the T, if you arrive on a green light and you want to turn left, you can see a cyclist waiting here in a bike box that we did mark, but there's no specific left turn lane there. That cyclist is waiting for the vehicle traffic to either a gap in that traffic, or more likely, because it's a fairly busy street, for the traffic signal to turn red. This is the same intersection from a different perspective, different cyclists, but really doing the same thing, waiting to make that left turn across the through vehicle traffic. And then when the signal changes, those cyclists make the left turn. Now, strictly speaking, they're making a left turn against a red light, and it's not legal, but it's safe because the only conflicting traffic is maybe some other cyclists and the pedestrians crossing. It seems to work, but it's not as clear as we'd like it to be, and it kind of relies on cyclists doing something that's strictly under the law, that left turn against red, they're not permitted to do. Jump ahead a few years, and we completed another project, something called the Comox-Helmken Greenway, and it also had a T intersection with Hornby Street coming from the other direction. In this case, with the experience that we'd had at Dunsmuir and Hornby, we gave it a lot more thought. We looked to the emerging guidance that was coming out of places like NACTO, and the graphic that you see in the top right there is from NACTO. So it's showing a left turn box for a single unidirectional protected bike lane, allowing cyclists to turn onto the crossing street into what might be bicycle facility, may not. What we've done is we've overlaid multiple turn movements because these two bike routes are each two-way protected bike lanes on the right side of one-way vehicle traffic. And so there's multiple turns that cyclists need to do, and they need to have some refuge in various places. And we've patched together some green and white paint that we think works reasonably well, but it's not quite there. It certainly doesn't provide the protected islands that a full protected intersection provides, but it was a step in the right direction. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of a couple of other intersections on that same project that I think are interesting. In this example, the bicycle route that we created back in 2013 has to cross a busy arterial street, Burrard Street, and it has to do that and deal with two offset T intersections. So the cyclists travel in on one street. They travel along a travel along a protected bike lane that's on the major arterial, cross diagonally at an intersection, and then connect into a protected bike lane on the other street. And this is what it looks like. in real life. It works fairly well, and we've come up with a way to both physically place the cyclists and the cars and the pedestrians in a way that they don't conflict with each other when combined with traffic signal timing that, again, separates all those movements. So that leads us to last year, 2014, when we again took a big, what we think now is a big step forward, and we moved west out of the downtown core itself into one of the adjacent neighborhoods, Kitsilano, that has very high bicycle mode share. We have large areas of this neighborhood have about 10% bicycle mode share, trip to work mode share. But some of the facilities in this area were rather lacking. That the bikes were there despite, not because of the facilities that we provided. So we built a new a high-level bike boulevard with a high level of treatment, and we constructed a couple of interesting intersections that I'm going to walk you through. First one was an intersection of two streets, Point Grey Road and Stevens Street. And this is the intersection as it was 2 or 3 years ago. 4-lane arterial street that used to carry about 20,000 vehicles a day. Although many times a day it was only moving 2 lanes at a time because parking is permitted. I think you can see in the bottom left there is some parking on the street. And we were trying to design for a predominant bicycle movement to making this S-shaped maneuver from that arterial street where we wanted to build protected bike lanes onto an adjacent street where we were about to introduce a bike boulevard. So this is the street as it looks today, similar aerial perspective, and then we've accommodated the traffic, the through traffic. We've accommodated it by completely reconfiguring the intersection, introducing a protected bike lane on the north side of the street, the right of this photo, putting in a signalized crossing, and that signal rests on green for the arterial street, so the vehicle and bicycle traffic moving along most of the time just travel through. But when that signal is triggered by a pedestrian that wants to cross the street or a cyclist, then the arterial traffic is stopped. The pedestrians can cross in a marked crosswalk with pedestrian actuation and pedestrian signal heads, and the bicycles can make that S turn in both directions, connecting from the bike boulevard in the background there onto the arterial street. And just to sort of reinforce the changes on the street, there's the same 2 photos again, side by side, before and after. Moving east along that same project, we got to the south end of the Burrard Bridge. That's the bridge that I mentioned that in 2009 we put in a protected bike lane by converting one of 6 vehicle lanes. So what we have today looks something like that. Looks pretty much exactly like that. It is what we think may be the first fully protected bicycle intersection in North America. Please let me know if you think otherwise, and I'll walk you through where we've come from and how we think that it works much better for both pedestrians and cyclists. So there's the intersection as it was a couple of years ago, a big sea of asphalt that had been configured like that pretty much since the bridge was opened in 1932. A little less paint back in 32 and a lot fewer cars, but the basic arrangement was a lot of asphalt. For a pedestrian to cross the street, they would need to cross 5 different roadway crossings and about 15 lanes of traffic to get from one side to the other. And we envisioned a much smaller intersection, shrinking it down to a more conventional T intersection. Most of the white area that you see there is now green lawn. The dark gray is asphalt, of course. And those pedestrians crossing that street now diagonally now need to make only 2 crossings of about 10 or 11 lanes as opposed to the 15 that used to be there. I'm going to show you a few before and after photos of that intersection. Here we're approaching it from the west. There's a couple of cyclists here on the sidewalk, presumably because they didn't feel safe mixing it in with traffic, but they're riding through a bus stop. This bus stop can get quite busy at times. This is one of the busier bus corridors in Vancouver. Today, that intersection now has a sidewalk, a wide bike lane, wide enough for cyclists to pass one another, and then a second bus landing, essentially a second sidewalk. There's a bus shelter in the background if that's not obvious. And everyone's in the space that we would like them to be in, and we're quite happy with the way that's working. On the opposite side of that street, before we made the changes, we had a conventional painted bike lane, fairly wide, fair bit of room, a lot of spare room. But today we've actually fully separated them with some physical protection from traffic, a curb separating the cyclists from the vehicles, and a much more comfortable place to be. Another view of the intersection. In the past, what you had separating bikes from vehicle traffic was a little bit of white paint. Today, the cyclists approaching the intersection are doing so fully separated from traffic by a curb, a strip of grass with some trees, and then they're riding on a paved bicycle path separated from the road. And then when they cross the intersection, they're doing so in a marked bicycle crossing, and the bicycle movements are separated from the vehicle movements by the signal phasing. So when these cyclists have the green cycle symbol to proceed, the car in the right, in the background, is stopped. It has a no right turn indication, and then when that car is allowed to turn, the bicycles have their stop indication. Across the street from that location, this is what it used to look like. The graphic in the bottom right is out of NACTO, and so even before we made these changes, we had an intersection. This particular part of the intersection was fairly good. It was doing what NACTO was saying we ought to be doing, and better than most intersections in Vancouver. Had some dedicated bike space that was clearly delineated with green paint and bike markings, and the right turning vehicles weren't turning across the bikes. But today what we have is the bicycles fully separated from the vehicle traffic, and the separation of those vehicles, the turning vehicles and the bicycles, is done with the signal phasing, not by asking cyclists to position themselves between two lanes of moving traffic. And if you're familiar with the protected intersections video, this screen capture might look familiar. And I show you this because it reminded, when I was looking at that previous photo, I was reminded of this perspective in the video, because what you see there is really the same, the configuration that we had built is what Nick Falbo's video showed for the positioning of the cyclists and separated from vehicle traffic. And in his video's case, he's got a row of parked cars. In our case, in this location, we have some grass and trees. Functionally, they work the same. So I'm not going to just try to explain how the intersection works for cyclists. So for a cyclist coming from the Burrard Bridge, heading southbound, they can make all the movements that they would want. They can turn right, they can continue straight through, or then they can make the left turn, the two-phase left turn across the one street, wait, and then across the other street. Now, if we had built the intersection with symmetrically, as the video suggests, we would have bicycle movements as shown in this purple line here. But there were reasons from a traffic capacity perspective, a vehicular capacity perspective, that we felt that that was going to break the intersection. We shrunk the intersection a lot from what it used to be. We reduced the number of lanes, but we came to the conclusion that including a pedestrian and cycling crossing on that leg was going to be going a little too far and lead us to some congestion and delays that we didn't think were going to be palatable. So instead, what we did is we made the two crossings that remain two-way. So the cyclists, instead of circulating through the intersection counterclockwise in all legs, the northbound to westbound ones need to do a bit of a zigzag, and those crossings become two-way crossings for bikes, not just one-way. So they're more similar to a pedestrian crossing in that regard. And so that's where we ended up. at this intersection. It's working. We're very happy with the way it's working. We've got a lot of good feedback, and we've got some actual numbers that support the changes that we made. The Burrard Bridge, for the last 5 years since we put in that protected bike lane on the bridge itself, was carrying fairly consistently just over 1 million bike trips a year. And in last year, in 2014, we saw 1.2 million bike trips across the same bridge. So, and our construction on this intersection didn't finish up until the spring. So we saw 20% more bikes across the bridge last year, 200,000 trips that didn't happen in the previous years. We think largely because of the changes we made at this intersection. So what's next? We've done a lot of changes in Vancouver in the last 5 years. We're not ready to stop. And right now we're looking at the north end of that same bridge. That's the intersection we have today. You can see some green paint and some bike lanes, but largely it's the way it was laid out in 1930 when the bridge was opened, 1932. And we want to try to apply the same thinking as we did on the south end to the north end. And I can't finish up without inviting you to Vancouver in September 2016. Hopefully you'll get a chance to ride. If you have a chance to come here, you can walk and ride on some of these facilities that we've been building, and we hope to have a few new ones to show you when you get here. And with that, I'll thank you. Oh, and before I wrap up, I want to give you two web links. One is protectedintersection.com that I already mentioned. The other one is a video that a colleague of ours put together. Some of those aerial photographs that I showed you were captures from this video, and you can find that at that Vimeo site if you write down those 10 numbers or however many there are and search for it. Or you can also search for the word C-cycle, and you should be able to find it. It's quite inspiring.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Great job, and really does give us a preview of what we can see in the future. So I'll just leave those emails up and the links for just a moment or two more while we go to the next to the Q&A. And I'll start first with this question from Timothy. What is the ADT and signal cycle length at the Burrard-Cornwall intersection? And do you know the crash history?
The ADT, I think there's about 60,000 vehicles cross that bridge every day. And the bicycle traffic varies seasonally. We're getting about 2,000 bikes a day right now. Now we've had a very mild winter, unlike some of you, so it's probably a little higher than it would normally be, and those numbers get up to 6,000 or 7,000 bikes a day in the summertime. The signal time, Ross, do you know?
I believe the signal time there is 85 seconds. Though typically in our downtown core we try to design for 65 seconds at every intersection.
And the crash history for cyclists, it was not the worst location in the city by a long shot, but it had problems, and we don't have enough data yet. It's really not even been a year since we finished construction, and we have a bit of a lag in getting that data. So we haven't heard any problems, but we don't have any hard numbers yet.
Okay, thank you. And then a question from John about potential conflicts between bicyclists and pedestrians. You mentioned on some of the other facilities like the seawall, there are some shared facilities. Do you have any issues on the Burrard Street Bridge with pedestrians and bicyclists conflicting, given that it's two-way traffic?
So I didn't go into a lot of detail on the bridge. The way that was configured was the vehicle lane turned into a southbound bicycle lane. One of the sidewalks on the east side of the bridge turned into a northbound bicycle lane, and the pedestrians were all directed to the west sidewalk. So in order to create the bicycle space in this project, we took away some pedestrian space. And that was a bit of a controversial issue, and we're actually working on a project that would undo that removal of pedestrian space. So we don't have the answer to the question is we don't have a lot of conflict on that bridge. we do have places where there's conflict on some heavily used multi-use paths nearby.
All right, thank you. And this is a great question from Axel, and a big welcome to Axel and Ben and I think it's Ina or Ida from New Zealand. Fantastic. So Axel is asking David, can you please email your presentation to us tonight? We have a project in Auckland where all those principles are very applicable, and that meeting is in just 22 hours. So he is sending his email to you, and I'll make sure that you get that so that you can send the presentation to him if you're...
Well, maybe we'll see if we can send Ross, who has family in New Zealand. Maybe he can go present for you.
Perfect. Good. I love that. Okay. And here is Ina asking a question. Are there any concerns by your safety team regarding the use of the planter boxes which you use to separate the cycle lane from the traffic lane?
Well, that's an interesting question. Those planters are plastic. And they're full of soil, of course. We've had a few of them hit by cars, and my observation is they seem to behave very similar to a crash attenuator that you'd use on a highway, full of sand or water. So they can make a bit of a mess when the plants and the soil get spread around, but from a safety point of view, we haven't had any concerns.
This is Ross, just to build on that as well, most locations we've tried to separate out the conflicting turning movements, so it's a one-way street crossing the two-way bike lane, and trying to use signal phasing and signage to indicate that. At locations where we have more uncontrolled crossings, low volume turns where we don't have a turn bay, we have looked at removing some of the planters to provide better sight lines. So at intersections where you might not have that turn bay or the signal phasing, just want to think about how that visibility issue.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your presentations, and we are out of time, and we answered all but I think one of the questions, which I think hopefully will become clear as we did send you all slides, a PDF of the slide presentation, so if you want to go back and review and get answers to any of your other questions, hopefully you can do that. We're sending you a short survey so you can tell us what you thought about today's presentation. My name is Kit Keller, and I'm Executive Director of APBP, the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, on behalf of all of our presenters who did a fantastic job, and Mark Plotz with the Project for Public Spaces, who puts on ProWalk, ProBike, ProPlace. We do hope to see you in Vancouver, BC in 2016, and APBP also hopes to see you in St. Louis for our professional development seminar in September of this year. So with that, I'll wish everyone a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and have a fantastic day. Take care, everyone.